Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up this week's theme of Now That's What I Call Unique, exploring songs that are just wildly different from anything we've listened to. As I have with every other video this week, I do want to put out the disclaimer that different people have different exposures and relationships to art and music and sound, and what might be very unique and otherworldly for one person might be a little bit more routine for someone else. So I think at the end of the day, most of the songs this week have been a bit more on the experimental side, even if they might not be fully unique from somebody's perspective. With all that said, let's dive into today's suggestion. We have Confessor with the song Hibernation off of their Unraveled album. Let's dive into it, see what Confessor is bringing to the table today. Start off with Repulse. Three, four, five, six, seven, eight. Yeah, so grouping of 3, 3, 2. Oh, interesting cymbal work. Very melodic. Yeah, so alternating 6 and 4 pulse on the guitars, which gives us 5/4 consistent. I don't know what the time signature is here. Yeah. Going with that wide reverb on Hiber, and then bringing in the Nation a bit more aggressive and singular, cutting through and piercing. Ooh, the accents on that. Okay. Cheeky little cymbal hit in the silence. The bass is really large in this. That's gotta be a 5-string bass. Dude, the drummer absolutely killing it. guitar accents shift from being in line with the drums to out of time with them. It did it through the whole guitar solo. So it makes it difficult to figure out what's going on. The drummer being more melodic though, I mean, dude, just... Such a 90s thing. That's my guess too, is that this is a 90s album. Those drags. Yeah, the bass kick multiple times in there shifted to some sort of tuplet. I don't think it was triplets, but it felt like the whole thing was dragging just a hair because of that. It's wild. 2005. Okay, so a little later than the 90s. That was wild. And I think it's crazy too because I'd wager that based off of this song, Confessor would be a pretty big band in this community. And they only have 1,000 monthly listeners on Spotify. This song only has 6,000 total plays. That is so small. Oh, they were formed in the 90s though. Okay. So that, yeah. That explains a little bit about their general sound. And I know, like, Spotify doesn't tell the whole picture, right? I don't know when Spotify came out. I think I've asked this before and I forgot about it. But it's tough to use Spotify as any sort of metric for older music. I mean, sometimes if it's that popular, it's gonna be shown in Spotify too. Like Beatles is just a heavily popular band, and you tend to see millions of plays on some of these songs, despite how old the albums are. Okay, so Spotify was founded in '06, so this came out before Spotify. Not by much, but enough. Early international launches. It launched in October of '08. So yeah. If people wanted to check this out, they would have done so buying an album. Or a cassette, or a CD. Probably CD. I don't know. The idea, though, is that Spotify doesn't tell the whole picture, especially on older albums. So they have a small amount of plays here, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people in the community haven't heard of them before. But, you know, it's wild, too, because I'll hear something like this. I'll be like, dude, this is wild. It's really well done. It's phenomenally played. The composition's interesting. It would fit my community so well, at least the portion of the community that loves their prog metal. Which I think prog metal is still my most reacted to genre. So, like I said, that's a pretty big chunk of the community, I think. And then to see that they're basically unknown, at least by Spotify metrics, it always confuses me to see something that I think should be really big and find out that they're not quite as... I actually quite enjoy this more than Dream Theater. It's nowhere near as palatable as Dream Theater, which I think is why Dream Theater is a bigger band, but it also could be so many other factors. There could also just be a chance that Confessor never really broke into the music world. Journalists never reviewed their music. They never really became a big name. And maybe all it needed was for people to hear their music for them to have been big. And for all I know, they were big, and Spotify's metrics are just not telling the whole story. There's like so much that goes into this. But yeah, I mean, it's just, like I said, it kind of upsets me and confuses me when I hear something like this and then see that it's just not being played, at least on this one platform. And YouTube's numbers tend to be lower than Spotify's, so not always, but generally. But y'all don't come here to tell me, to listen to me talk about metrics and how popular stuff is. You actually come here most often to hear less popular songs getting reviewed and, more importantly, spoken about analytically. So let's dive into that. Metric stuff. Yeah, this song's got all of it. We kick it off with a 4/4 that's broken up into groups of 3, 3, and 2 to give us 8 beats, which is 2 bars of 4. Kind of a straightforward idea, but they do it in an interesting way that allows the first 2 groups of 3 to have a bit more forward energy, and that last group of 2 to sort of pull it back a little bit. It actually feels like it slows down, like that section gets dragged out and pulled out quite a bit. It actually took me a second to realize we were doing this 3-3-2 and that we weren't in 3-4 or 6-8. And as soon as I figured this out, we had moved on to the next idea that was 5-4. We had 2 bars of 5 giving us 10 beats in total. And that was grouped up, if you listen to the guitar, into a group of 6 and then a group of 4. Again, working with this asymmetric division of a phrase. This is something that I think permeates this entire song and is why it's so difficult to figure out what's going on a lot of the time, is because there's just no rigidity to time. It's constantly in flux. You know, even if it's some weird time signature like, I don't know, 13/16 or something, as long as it's a consistent 13/16, I'll be able to pick up on it rather quickly. It's just an exercise of counting, of finding a beat, more importantly, finding the beginning beat of a phrase, and then counting until you hit that beginning, that beginning lick again. Here, though, it's difficult to ever find one. But even if you find one, the groupings are constantly changing. You have found one for this pulse of 6, but have you found, the next pulse? Do you know how long that is, or the one after it? Do you know how long it takes for us to get back to that 6? And so the phrases end up feeling a bit difficult to pin down. They're just constantly in flux. But the other thing that comes into this question isn't just the pure time that's going on for the band, it's the time for individual instruments too. I am very certain that there's polymetric ideas in here. If not, then at least polyrhythmic, as we heard towards the end of the song, where the guitar was constantly shifting between accenting with the drums and accenting between the drum accents. In a sense, it felt like the guitars were shifting from accenting down beats to accenting off beats, the midpoint between 2 beats. And this shift usually indicates some sort of odd versus even, where, like if you take 7/8, for example, and you put that against a general snare accent on every other beat, the snare is going to play 14 beats, hitting every other beat. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 2, repeating back there. Whereas the 7 is going to be on downbeats for that 7, but when we shift to the other half, we're actually going to lose half of a beat here, as the drums are still working with that quarter note every other beat idea, but whatever's playing the 7 here has lost that other half of a beat to take us to that 4/4. We have 3.5 beats here. And so instead of being on the downbeat, they're going to be on the off beat, in the middle between beats. But after that 14th beat, they're going to line back up again. So having an odd versus even phrasing. Something like that is probably what's going on there at the end. It's what makes the two instruments start lined up and then get out of phase and then return to being lined up. It gets quite convoluted when you bring together the ideas of polyrhythm or polymeter, either one, whichever one's being showcased in here, and odd time signatures and asymmetric phrasing. When you bring all that together, it's going to be something that takes a few listens to pin everything down and figure out what's going on. As far as just time and rhythm are concerned, we're not even talking about anything else yet. This is just to understand the feeling of the song. But what I love is, despite all of the complexity, I never really had a problem moving my body, nodding my head to the song. There's always something providing a rigid beat. Usually with some sort of cymbal. The toms and snare and drums were usually, and bass kick were usually all over the place. There's usually some sort of cymbal, though, giving us a downbeat or every other downbeat, or just some sort of rigid rhythm against all the other syncopation, so that even if you have no idea what's going on in the song, you can still groove to it. You can still headbang to it. I think this is a cornerstone to some of the best progressive rock and metal out there, is to create something that is hyper dense, hyper complex, that would take multiple listens and, at least for me, sheet music, some sort of way of notating what I'm hearing, because I'm not going to remember it all. I'm going to have to take notes in order to figure out what's going on. But that, despite that complexity, there is just enough simplicity to it that you can still feel the general groove. And I think that's what drags a lot of people into complex metal, and is the huge dividing point between people who like prog rock, prog metal, and experimental or avant-garde rock and metal. Because those tend to do away with the hand-holding, if you want to view it that way. The thing that allows you to not understand what's going on, but still jam with it. When you remove that, that's typically when you get into the more experimental side of things. And they're less concerned in having that element, that the safety railing for the more casual fans. And like I said, I think that's where prog rock and prog metal tend to excel. Create something complex, but allow casual listeners to enjoy it too. And on the metric side, that's how it's done. Now, there's another part to this that I guess I could technically put into that timestamp, but I want to focus on it in singularity here. The drummer is bonkers. Y'all heard that drum work? This sort of ties into that idea, because the drums here do polyrhythmic stuff, maybe polymetric stuff, and there's a lot of rhythmic ideas in here that add to the complexity, to all that tempo metric stuff we just got done talking about. But there's another layer to this that makes it even more confusing. The drums in most bands are pattern based. That pattern might be a bit more complex, but you can typically find a 2 or 4 bar phrase and see a loop of what the drummer is doing, and it's usually some sort of metric roll idea. For instance, a very simple drum pattern would be bass kick on 1 and 3, snare on 2 and 4, and a hi-hat on all 4. That's a very simple pattern, and it's a 1 bar pattern, and once you hear it, it's static. You can hear it all the time. It never changes. It provides a nice tempo. It provides some nice changing sounds to create a little bit of syncopation in the timbre, and it provides some accents in order to groove to, because you get those heavy snare hits on 2 and 4. Now, what happens, though, if you decide not to use a pattern at all? In fact, what if you choose not to even have rolls of saying the snare emphasizes these specific beats? That's what you get with this drummer, who I think primarily plays in linear melodic fashion. That is to say that instead of deciding what beats any sound should be on in order to emphasize specific accents. Um, Instead, it's played more of like a guitar or a violin or any other pitched instrument, in that each of the parts of the drum kit can be perceived as a different note, and if you want to play a melody, you just play them in a specific order. And that's what the drums feel like to me. They're very melodic. It isn't about creating a beat, although we do have rhythmic component to it, as all melody is also typically rhythmic as well as melodic. But it isn't hyper focused on being that human metronome. It isn't hyper focused on creating that groove. We do typically hear a cymbal or something providing that core backbeat. There is metric elements that are accented to fit alongside what the guitars are doing, what the vocals are doing, and sometimes to dance around that as well. But at its core, it feels like it's melodic drumming. And also, I think the important part is linear. It is very tough for me to hear any repeated patterns in what the drummer's playing. Some of that might just be that the patterns themselves are so large. Maybe we're talking about 8 or 16 bar ideas, and that is just too large of an idea to have so much information in there for me to notice, oh, hey, we've started back at the beginning of this, because honestly, I don't remember what the beginning sounded like. I've had so many complex rhythms thrown at me in the last 30 seconds. I don't remember what it started out. So it might not be fully linear, but that's what it felt like to me. And drums are very rhythmic. And so when we have all of this rhythmic complexity from the metric stuff, from the polyrhythm, from the separated accent points between all the instruments, and then you also bring in the fact that the drummer isn't just playing typical grooves, yeah, that just adds another layer to this song of trying to figure out what's going on with the time. But it also introduces a melodic layer to the song that kind of plays around everything else. We have two more melodic instruments in here. We have the guitars and the vocals. The vocals play lead melody. The drums, in a sense, play counterpoint to that, or counter melody. It's a second melodic line. It doesn't always line up. Well, it doesn't really line up pitch-wise, because I don't think most people hear pitch with percussion, at least not with a drum kit. Each part of the drum kit is pitched, it is tuned. There is a tuning key to change the note that your drum plays, but it's not what most people think of, I think, and even I have a hard time hearing the drum kit as notes. But it does play around rhythmically with what the vocals are doing too. And so we just get that another layer of complexity here, one of melodic complexity. But then we also have the guitars around this as well. Some of the riffs are a bit more melodic, some are a bit more rule of cool riffy style. And then of course we have the solo guitar, which is the time I think the guitar takes the most melodic approach to writing, and is also when it's isolated. We have a little bit of drum complexity underneath that, but for the most part, I wouldn't say that there was counterpoint there, not in the same way that we hear it during the verse and chorus. There's just a lot of stuff going on all levels. This brings us to the harmony, though, which I think is the simplest component to the song. There isn't a lot of width to this. We have some pretty standard, I think, power chords going on in the guitars. The bass is providing texture layering more than harmonic layering, as I believe they're just playing the root note to the chord that the guitars are playing a majority of the time, following along with the rhythm of either the guitars or the bass kick, whichever one the bass guitar wants to play along with at the time. And for this reason, the bass guitar actually kind of disguises itself in the mix. When I really want to listen for it, I can find it, but it takes me a second. I have to listen to this really large sub-bass tone. The bass guitar just kind of blends into the song, and I love the tone of it. It is dark, it's meaty, it is a massive tone that's kind of reduced in volume and tucked into the composition by not adding anything unique to what's already being played. I really wish the bass would have been doing anything else here. Not just because I want to hear that tone by itself doing something unique, but also because I feel like this band has the chops for that. There is a lot of technical writing on this from the um, melodic perspective, and I would have just loved to have heard another layer of that. Let the bassist do something that adds to what the vocals are doing or what the guitar is doing. Give it a unique part. I thought that would have worked really well. Um, but yeah, so like it's a simple harmony. We don't really go into any weird scales or keys or chord progressions. This part feels the most rooted in traditional metal sounds. And I think it actually works well, though. It would have been cool to have some interesting chord theory explored on this, but at the same time, given how chaotic everything else is, you have to have something that sort of roots it down, that grounds the song. And I think that having a more palatable harmonic palette, a palatable harmonic palette. I mean, I guess that's right. It's funny to use palette twice that way. It's what keeps it grounded. It's what keeps it more accessible. And as usual, like I said, this is what prog metal excels at: is finding accessibility within more complex ideas. And so having all these wild concepts being thrown out there, and then also keeping something rather routine that people can latch on to. Like, yeah, dude, the rhythms in here are wild, but I mean, it's still metal, right? That's the kind of thing that's going to hook an audience in. So I dig that. Um, I think the last thing I want to bring up here before we hit lyrics is just the vocals themselves. I had a really tough time placing these, but I love all the little nuances that's going on. I think the vocals are the thing that had me guessing, constantly changing my guess of what era this came from. And it wasn't until the very end when I was like, okay, this is just forward-facing 90s stuff. When we had that reverb. No, it wasn't a reverberate. It was it was the echo. Yeah, he said like hibernate or hibernation, and then it like had this massive reverb on it, but then we also got like this delay constantly coming in after it, like an echo. That's such a 90s idea. But everything else felt a bit more modern. He does have a little bit of the grit and falsetto that we hear in a lot of, not falsetto, the when you vibrate, vibrato. The grit and the vibrato that you can hear in a lot of heavy metal. So we kind of have that tied to the past too. But some of the grit comes out a bit more aggressive. It feels more of a modern sound for metal. And the vibrato isn't overly used. We also don't have any belting in here, which makes it feel a bit more of the turn of the millennium. And I don't know, like I said, there's just a lot of nuance to it. It obviously is something that's influenced from metal singers of the past, but is attempting to push forward into the current realm of, post 2000s, and I'd say even late 90s metal vocalists, getting away from the earlier heavy metal into where metal was going at the time. But we have a lot of variation in that, and then also on the production side, there's a lot of neat twists in there as well. As I mentioned during the first chorus, on the beginning of Hibernation, on the Hiber, there's this very big echo, lots of reverb, great vibrato on this. That kind of feels closer to the older style. But then on Nation, it gets narrowed in, all the reverb's gone, it's very cutting, and the delivery is very forward placed. We kind of get away from that nice resonant warm tone at the back of the mouth. It's more projected, it's cutting, it has more grit to it. It almost sounds like a compressed clean, and part of that is the delivery, but the other part, of course, is the production on it. And I think that's a really interesting decision there. It adds a lot of character and color to the vocal performance on both sides. Usually before we go into the lyrics, I tell y'all what I feel like the song is about, but I really don't have a grasp on it. It's a chaotic song that I never really felt like I was ever not free falling during. It constantly throws you around. I never had a grasp on it. And it just sounds like a mathy, wild metal song. It just has that aggression of metal with the wild changes of like mathcore or something. So, yeah, I don't have an overarching story or what the emotion of the song was for me, other than like me trying to ride a bull. That's what it felt like, trying to wrangle a beast that I lost to, honestly. I'm going to read some lyrics on this, and then we're going to wrap this video up. All right, and this is a metaphor, I think, for a recluse, someone who holds himself up in their house, slowly allows themselves to become afraid of society, of what is outside the four walls that surrounds them. The first verse says, tucked away inside this cold place, walls begin to close, but I'm still safe, safe from the unknown sins out there. I live each day alone and scared. It's hibernation season. The second says, curled up in a ball of yarn, my mind's unraveled and soul is torn, but I'm still safe. Again, safe from the unknown sins out there that I live each day alone and scared. So this person is, the thing is too, is that we need social contact. We need physical contact too. Even just a hug can greatly make somebody's day better. I'm real good with words. Can greatly improve somebody's day. There's chemical changes in the brain. Dopamine and stuff is released on physical touch. Hanging around friends is good for our mental health as well. If you decide to hole yourself up in a house just by yourself, living in isolation, especially in the constant state of fear, that's not healthy mentally. And I think this song showcases that. He says his mind becomes unraveled, but I think more importantly, his soul is torn. The final verse says, days I waste away, dreading more the next day. I retreat back into my shell, feel the pain of living hell. In the recent years, all I've seen is fear, but now the time has come for my hibernation. Now, maybe this is part of a larger concept album, prog metal bands and their concept albums. Maybe this makes more sense within a larger narrative, but I do want to take this very straightforward idea of hibernating in one's own house and taking that on a metaphorical angle and viewing it not as any one person literally going into their house, but more of just shutting yourself off from the outside world and what it means to be a hermit and how mentally destructive that can be, especially again when it's compounded by fear. I think this is a really interesting story, a little parable, if you will, for 2024. I mean, honestly, just the post 2020s. And the idea of shutting yourself off from the world around you and being controlled by fear. I'm not going to name names. I'm just going to throw that out there. You can extrapolate from that what you want, but I do feel that despite being written 20 years ago, that it's very appropriate today. What that has to do with the song, I mean, the song is wild, it's eclectic, it's difficult to grasp. I could make an argument that it could be a representation of a fractured mind, but honestly, I don't know that that's what it's about. I think it's just supposed to be about the destructive component of isolation. And instead of having a song that is atmospherically showcasing that, maybe having tension or eeriness in the harmonic element and playing around with a sort of solitary sound, maybe just a handful of instruments and a vocal, maybe having sections that would be just vocals with a lot of reverberation or something like that. They went for something that was more melodically driven with heavy riff usage and catchy melodies from the vocals, and showing the chaos of all of this in a destructive route. Which is another cool thing that art does well, is to take a concept and different artists can interpret it in different ways and do drastically different things with their art, but all say the same thing. So I always think that's cool about art. It's wonderful. Those are my thoughts on Confessor's Hibernation. What do you think of this? Is there anything that stands out to you? Anything you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Maybe you just have your own perspective and opinion on this track. Put all that stuff down in the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright, that wraps it up for today. We do have a new music video. We have a reaction to some new music coming up next. If that doesn't interest you, though, I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC. We're going to be checking out a full album. It's usually like a 3.5 hour video. We're checking out some Tristania tomorrow, which I think is that symphonic metal? I think so, but maybe it isn't. We've only listened to a couple of Tristania tracks, and maybe I'm getting them mixed up. Anyways, that's what we're looking at tomorrow. And then, of course, Sunday we have the live stream at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. UTC. Come out, we hang, we chat, we listen to some good music. It lasts for 2 hours. It's a good time. If you can make it, drop on by. Otherwise, of course, I'll be here Monday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC, as usual, with Spooky Week. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.